Can you hear me? So, good morning, everybody. Is that all right? Is that all right? Can you hear me at the back? Oh, it's not the good one. No, it's both. Okay. One is for the recording. Okay. Is that better now? Okay, thank you. Thanks for the colors, by the way. So, my name is Cédric Brun, and welcome at EclipseCon Europe and at the Unconference. I'm CEO at Obeo, and Obeo is building quite a few technologies into the Eclipse modeling project. And I'm the project lead of Ecore tools. And I decided to take this few minutes with you to just show you all the kind of features that are kind of hidden in Ecore tools. So that's why it's called the utility belt for Ecore modeling. By the way, if you have the chance to thank Ed during the conference for the work he done on EMF, do not hesitate. That's something we will deeply appreciate. So I'm going to move on the demo right away, and then we'll get back to the slide just to make sure that I did not forget anything during the demo. So this is an Eclipse-based tool. It's actually Obeo Designer Community Edition. It's an integration build based on Eclipse Oxygen. So when you install the Ecore tools into your environment, you have some wizard to directly create a new Ecore modeling project. So these wizards allow you to, well, let's say, create a project for EclipseCon or conference modeling. And then in the next pages, you can set all the critical parameters for your Ecore model. And then you're good to go and create your own Ecore model. So Ecore tools is basically a set of modeling tools, but mostly graphical modeler to define your Ecore model. So what kind of features do you have here? So you can, of course, create classes, and there is live validation, meaning, for instance, if you rename the class in an invalid way from an Ecore perspective, then it gets read. And you can see the error just by hovering over the class. This kind of features is actually brought by a specific layer. So using this icon, you can enable and disable specific layers, and this is the validation layer. If you disable it, then you'll get back to something more classical with this live validation behavior. When we put Ecore tools in hands of students, for instance, they do all kind of nice stuff that breaks the model in innovative ways. So Ecore tools kind of do stuff like, for instance, if you write a name which is my class with a space, we know it's not going to be valid right away, so we just use the camel case and set it. This is the kind of small tweaks that make things simpler for students. I also made sure that you could be very efficient in defining your attributes. So for instance, if I have a data type here, let's call it just data, and if I have an attribute here, I can just type the name, and it's going to change the name. And of course, I could change the name and pick the data, but I could just also write colons and the type, and it's just gonna change the type. It's going to keep the name as is. If I write 1, then the attribute is mandatory. If I type star, then it's a many attribute. So there's lots of shortcuts like that. I'm not sure. Maybe I can lower the resolution. No, don't do that. Okay. Well, I can zoom on the diagram, of course. There. So Another concern I had is I want to be able to edit in full screen. So you're at a meeting with a customer, and the customer starts giving you information, and you're capturing all this information into an Ecore model. And it's very convenient during this meeting when you have this displayed on the screen, just to define everything. But then you don't have access to any of the properties. So in Ecore tools, the properties are there, but if you double click, you get a dialog which shows all the properties that you would like to set. So this enables the use of Ecore tools in full screen. Let's get back to an already existing diagram. So you got this already existing diagram. Here it's flow model, sorry, an Ecore model. And Ecore tools brings a lot of features to discover this diagram. So you can create a new class diagram, and then when it starts, it's empty. You can just build your diagram to understand, and then maybe export or so on. So you can start with an element. I'm going to start with the system element. Oops. And here I can see the system elements, and from there I'm going to build the diagram which show this Ecore model. So if I click, I can add related elements and see all the related elements on based on the selection. And from this, I can create a new diagram here. So this is another view of the existing Ecore model. I have another diagram here which contains more information. There are a number of filters you can use to get another kind of display. So this is the flow diagram. Another thing which is pretty new, let's add a new class. So I just created a new class. And behind the scene, Ecore tool is going to reload all the gen model and all that stuff that you have to do by hand all the time. So here you're ready to generate, and you can generate directly here, right-clicking, and so the code got generated, and I have the new class file right there. Let me zoom a bit more. You can also set all the generation settings, just like Ed showed in the Ecore editor. Now we have this new tab here called generation, and it allows you to set any properties of the gen model based on the current Ecore model selection. So if I click on the background of the diagram, then I can set the directories to generate to the prefix and all these settings that are in the gen model. So this comes pretty much for free because Sirius has new support for property views. And you see there's all the documentation strings from the gen model directly into those properties. At the right, we have buttons to trigger the generation again. So we can generate the model, edit, or editor, or everything, for instance. So let's, I don't know, let's pick somewhere and add a new operation. So there's another specific property view for handling parameters of an operation. So you can either write all the signature here, but it can be pretty tedious, and if you make any mistake, then you have to do it again. So it can be pretty painful, but I'll just rename the operation and say it returns a string. So this is very convenient to do here. But if I want to create a new parameters, I can just create it here. And here you see it's in red because the parameter has yet to have a type. So let's say an int. So I added a new operation. I generate, And see, there is this small button to open Java implementation of the corresponding element. So I clicked on composite processor here, and if I click there, I end up in composite processor imp. And I should be able to find my operation and then the code I have to implement. There's another layer which is pretty useful, which is called documentation. When you enable the layer documentation, then everything which isn't documented goes red, and you can add new annotations onto the elements. So this is actual e-annotation documentation, which are used by the code generation and so on. So for instance, if I click on the power here and I have this tab, I can just update documentation like that. Or if I click somewhere else, like on the new e-class here, oh, new documentation appearing. And when I do that, then this documentation annotation is directly created and bound to the corresponding element. So this is one way to do it. It's mostly like if you want to show something in the diagram and document it. There's another way, which is using the documentation table. You can just right click on a package, create a new documentation table, and then you have every element, and you can just start documenting right there. So you can also write meaningful documentation. You don't have to do like me, right? So it's very efficient. Then you can document all your Ecore model, and this is going to be used during the generation of EMF to pop user documentation for the Java doc and stuff like that. Okay, another new addition. So you have this project which contains the implementation of the Ecore model, and you have the .edit project which contains, well, the part which handles label, display, and edit of the model. And in this one you have icons that you can change and adapt. With Oxygen, if I recall correctly, there's a new layer which is called icon preview. You can click it, and then all the icon of the class will be changed by the icon you picked into your .edit folder. So that's also pretty nice to check that, oh yeah, power input has no icon there, or some interfaces, and it can also be useful to provide more meaningful diagram. Okay. And last but not least, there is the capability to have some kind of analysis of your Ecore modeler. So let's say you create a new package. So I'm creating a new package here, and I'm gonna, well, add a new array. And I can also create a package dependency diagram. So what does this package do? Well, it's empty at first, and I can just pick which package I want to see. So I want to see the flow package, and I want to see the new package I just created. So it could be packaged from any Ecore model which are in another project and so on. So there's no dependency at all from a package to another, sorry. So if I add a new class, and if I, let's say, supertype reference, then you can see that there are dependencies already. And if I remove it, the dependencies are removed. If I add a new reference, then I have a new dependency with each time the concerned element and the number of dependencies it has. If you hover a bit, you have the explanation of what are the dependencies exactly. So this is pretty useful if you want to conduct a small, pretty quick analysis of the dependencies in between your packages. So these kind of features are coming from our experience in building Ecore models for the last 10 years. I also captured most of the rules that I tried to implement in Ecore tools through a collection of blog posts, which is Ecore design checklist, which is using a My Little Pony Ecore model, which makes it very relevant to business cases. And I have a couple of slides just to go through the new features that I might have missed during the demo. So, as I mentioned, there's a reload of gen model, and also now the wizard is picking better default when you create a new gen model, because it used to, well, pick default based on EMF 2.7 or 8. If you have CDO in your target platform, then you can enable or disable the support of CDO directly from the diagram. That's also something which is pretty useful for beginners, let's say. So the documentation annotation with the layer or the table. So here are a few of the shortcuts you can use while editing. So if you just type something, it's going to change the name of the feature. If you type 2 dots, some type, it's going to change the type, and the one to make it mandatory, you can make the feature derived using a slash. You can set the default value just starting with an equal sign and so on. Other shortcuts which are coming from Sirius, which are pretty useful, Control H to hide something in the diagram, or Control O to navigate within the diagram. That's pretty useful. For instance, here, if I just write Control O and I'm like, hey, okay, let's find the power shape, and you're on it, it's there. So, as I said, you can create many diagrams in Ecore tools based on the same Ecore model. That means that when you want to delete something from the diagram, you can just you have to use a specific shortcut, which is majuscule plus delete. If you write delete, it's going to remove it from the Ecore model and update all the corresponding diagrams. Of course, if that's a mistake, you can just undo and do it again. You can also model generics using Ecore tools, as they're going to be displayed this way in the graphical modeler. I mentioned e-parameter property view, and also there is a generic support for any kind of annotation. It's in this tab. So you can just write any annotation with a source, a reference, and add a new entry and so on, and delete the entry and move it and so on. So it all goes through the property view. You can define constraints in the diagram. So right now, if you define a constraint, you'll have to enable the corresponding layer here. And let's say I want to create a new constraint on powered, and I just have to write the name of the constraint. So you don't specify the logic behind the constraint. If you just write the name, it's going to generate the corresponding code, and you'll have to implement it into the Java code. So what would be nice at some point would be to have better tool support to design constraints using, for instance, AQL or something like that, but it just did not happen yet. So if you're looking for this kind of features, you can come to us and discuss. So you can really build focus diagram and build a diagram and use it to express something and to show something. You can either show the class content, you can show all the inherited content from an element, you can even show indirect generalization. So if you have two e-classes into a diagram, you can show that they have an indirect relationship and inheritance. All the gen model settings are provided through the editor. The navigation to Java, icon preview. There are a couple of Eclipse views so that when you click somewhere, you can see the related elements and just drag and drop those into the diagram also. And there's also a new view which got contributed by Pierre Coffilet, and which is e-class information, which based on the selection, you can inspect the meta model behind it. So any EMF model, you can just click and inspect the corresponding emitter model. In the Oxygen version, we rewrote all the property views. They used to use the EEF framework first generation, and I deleted all of this and moved to the new support of Sirius, which removed pretty much all the code of Ecore tools. I'll get back to that. So this brings lots of nice features, as I showed right before. So, but this is pretty new. So if you see anything weird, just report a bug. And also you can create a diagram based on Ecore models. So how do you do that? You first have to install the specific integration between Sirius and Xtext. And once you have this, and here we have a project with an Ecore file, and if it's a project which is managed by Sirius, then Sirius is going to pick it as a model, and you can see the e-package in it, and you can just right-click, create a new diagram. So it's only for visualization. If you create a new e-class into the diagram, I don't even know what will happen. But if you edit from the Xcore and just create a new class and save, then the diagram will be updated. So because the Xcore transformed to Ecore, then this way works. And when you change something in the Ecore, there's no other transformation going on. So nobody did implement that yet. So if that's something which is useful to do to you again, we're there. So another interesting fact about Ecore tools is that it's powered by Eclipse Sirius. So that means that everything I show you right now, it's actually less than 3,000 lines of code. It's all specified in the Sirius configuration model, and it's also conformed to all the best practices that we have regarding Sirius modelers. So it's pretty interesting to look at how Ecore tools is defined into the ODesign file. It's all inspectable. You can see how it works. There's no magic trick there. And also that makes it completely extensible. So if you want to, I don't know, create a new layer which changes colors depending on some business rules, or if you want to add new shapes into the diagrams which are coming from another model, if you want to, I don't know, the sky is the limit here. It's very easy to create a new project with Sirius which is going to adapt the behavior of Ecore tools. So just a few words about the Envision roadmap. I say Envision because it might depend on lots of things. What is on the roadmap right now is that the new support about versioning and deprecation annotation that Ed just showed before. I like to support it into the diagram. That would be nice to see deprecated elements with strike through, which is supported by Sirius, by the way. So that should be pretty easy, and have proper support for versioning and scenes annotation directly in the property views would be also a nice addition. There's also another initiative which is mostly led by the INRIA team in Rennes, which is AIL. It's an action language for EMF. It's pretty cool addition, as it provides execution semantic to any kind of EMF model, so you can use it to define that semantic directly with Ecore and specify the behavior of your operation. You can even open an existing class, so let's say from the UML meta model, for instance, and add a new behavior there. And it's based on it's using AQL, which I'm going to present a bit later in the morning, I think. That's pretty much it for me. If you want to give a shot at Ecore tools, if you did not try it yet, you can either download it through the Eclipse modeling package, through the marketplace, and it's packaged and tested in Obeo Designer Community Edition, which is all EPL stuff. So if you have any questions. No question? Well, thank you very much then.